Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kristen, and these are my final thoughts on the Pen and Ink Pairings for September 2023. As I mentioned in my initial thoughts video, I purchased 9 of these 13 pens at the San Francisco Pen Show this year, and I spent all of September getting to know them a little better. Even with a couple hiccups that I'll recount for you a bit later, I have to say that this is the best lineup of pens that I have ever experienced in my fountain pen journey. For the month of September, I switched things up. Usually, I would select a couple Diamine Inkfint colors, 1 or 2 recent ink flight samples, something from my own bottled ink collection, 1 or 2 pen pal samples, and maybe throw in a diagnostic pen or ink of some kind. But for September, I wanted to focus on these very special pens. As I review these pen and ink pairings, you'll notice that some of my writing samples are in cursive. I felt compelled to switch up my handwriting in September because of the italic style grinds and thicker nib points in some of these pens. I've also got a few more writing samples than usual to show you because last month I was just coming up with random excuses to write with these pens. They're just that good. If you ever want to become more consistent with your journaling habits or handwriting practice, then use a pen that you don't want to put down. This is the Montegrappa Elmo with an extra fine nib, and it's inked up with Inkebara 610 Deer Brown. This pen and ink combo was very pleasant. This is a stiff nib that I really love, and the writing experience was only enhanced by the beautifully finished Marshmallow acrylic. Last month, this pen showed me that it's not completely airtight. Simone mentioned this in 1 or more of her previous videos, but it became very clear to me in September. The pen did not dry out, but this ink flight sample is significantly darker than it was when I first inked up the pen in August. I know for a fact that September's pen and ink pairings were excellent for me because this TWSBI Eco Smoke Rose Gold with Colorverse Iris Nebula was not one of my top 5 pen and ink pairings in September. Did my experience with this pen and ink go downhill? No. It's still great, but all the other pens in this lineup felt so much better. I still love both the ink and the pen, and I enjoy using this pairing every chance I get. So I used Dominant Industry Matin in another TWSBI with a medium nib so that I could compare it to Colorverse Iris Nebula. I enjoyed this combo. Matin is a beautiful and well-behaved ink, albeit more pale and slightly drier than Iris Nebula. I am glad that I have a full bottle of Iris Nebula, and I do not have a desire to add Matin to my collection. I really enjoyed the Esterbrook Estie this month. Yes, I am surprised about this one because the ink was red, and I rarely enjoy red inks. Diamine Spiced Apple, one of the 2 Inkvent selections for this month, was the perfect complement to the Botanical Gardens acrylic. Many times, this red ink with gold sheen and shimmer had me thinking that I should be writing Christmas cards instead of journal entries. It wasn't a bad thing. It was just something that popped up in my mind pretty often. The journaler nib was very pleasant. I found myself immediately warming up to the pen as soon as I started writing, which was actually pretty common with most of the pens this month. This pen and ink combo surprised me even more than the Esterbrook Estie with Diamine Spiced Apple. The Techo nib on this Esterbrook Model J is a very subtle grind, and I actually like that. There was just enough variation to the strokes in my writing that it looked and felt like I was writing with a fancy pen and not a marker. I also like the more gritty feedback on this nib. It wasn't scratchy, but it also wasn't buttery smooth. It added a pleasant texture to the smoothest of papers. The feedback reminds me of my Pilot Custom 74 with a fine nib. Now, I wonder if the intensity of this feedback stems from the not so lubricating ink, Diamine Flame, or if it's inherent in the nib grind and will persist regardless of the ink's properties. Diamine Flame was a pleasant orange ink. It was just enough coral in there to make the color bearable for me, but it wasn't remarkable enough for me to want a full bottle of it. This fountain telling pen is gorgeous, and the matte finish feels so good in my hands. I enjoy looking at the shimmery green and brown swirls whenever I pick up the pen. It's noticeably slimmer than many of the pens in my September lineup, and I find myself getting straight to the point whenever I journal with this pen. My hand tends to grow tired very quickly with such a narrow pen, but this is one that I'm willing to keep because it's beautiful and it's a Kristen Brooks pen, a Kristen pen. Sailor Manyo Fuji looks gray sometimes and purple at other times. It was very well behaved, and I look forward to trying that ink in a wider nib sometime in the future. Pelikan 4001 Brilliant Brown is really interesting. And it's strange to my ears every time I say that. One could ask, how can a brown ink be anything but plain? But I could probably make a video of all the brown inks that I find interesting. Maybe I should. But back to this ink. Brilliant Brown is a warm and saturated reddish color while wet, but dries to a warm, almost neutral brown. And the subtle shading with this broad cursive italic is absolutely beautiful to me. Speaking of the pen, the Pelikan M800 is a gorgeous pen, and it adds a very pleasant weight in my hand that anchors my mind and emotions to the present, even as I reflect on the past during my journaling sessions. I've got to say that Mr. Mike Masuyama is a genius at what he does. When he grinds and tunes nibs, he ensures that the nib retains its signature feedback. What does that mean? The nib on my Sailor 1911 Large that he worked on last year has the signature Sailor feedback. This Pelikan that he ground to a broad cursive italic has the signature Pelikan smoothness. His expertise and attention to detail are blowing my mind even right now. The Franklin-Christoph Model 2 is so nice. I love the look and feel of this pen and the beautifully ground broad sig nib. This pen was made even better with a super lubricated ink. This is the last bit of Manuscript Praline frosting that I have because I gave away the full bottle before I took the time to really use the ink in one of my pens. Because of that, I will not be cleaning out this pen. I will instead enjoy every last drop of this brown ink with gold shimmer in a pen that makes me happy. The SCHON Design full-sized Peekaboo fountain pen with a perspective ground monarch nib, that's a long name, is one of the many pens that made me long to write on paper with larger grids and line heights. I loved writing with this pen whenever I had enough room to write with it. Because of my borderline low writing angle, the Naginata Togi style grind was a bit too thick in my Hobonichi, and I completely forgot about the possibility of taking advantage of the reverse side of the nib for an extra fine line. I'm kind of sad about that missed opportunity, but I'm also wondering if I could stomach using such a beautiful nib face down for long writing sessions. The SCRIBO feel with its fine flex nib gave me some problems this month. Or should I say the ink? Anderillium Purple Gallinule Purple caused the problem. Whatever the case, this combination clashed horribly. The ink dried out in the pen daily, and I would feel the desire to flex the nib just to keep the ink flowing throughout each writing session. This erratic problem resulted in writing samples that looked both dry and blobby. So since I was determined to use the SCRIBO in September, I cleaned out the pen and inked it up with the safe and predictable Waterman Serenity Blue. It seemed like both I and the pen gave a sigh of relief. This pen is such a juicy writer that I saw a bit of sheen in Serenity Blue. This new pairing was great, apart from two other problems. One, I don't care for the color of Waterman Serenity Blue. And two, using this pen in a Hobonichi is the equivalent of locking a Great Dane in a 600 square foot apartment all day long, or driving a Porsche 911 at rush hour on a stormy day. There is so much untapped potential that it is almost painful. I had the most fun using this pen in my notebooks with lined or plain paper. I had room to breathe and let the smooth nib glide freely across the paper. Sometimes I flexed the nib, but most times I didn't. I felt it was a bit overkill to try and flex the nib when the pen already laid down so much ink on the paper. Either way I wrote, there was still some variation in my strokes just because the nib is so delightfully bouncy. Can we just take some time to look at this pen? The brute force design fountain pen in Spalted Maple is naturally beautiful. You've got burl, zone lines, discoloration, and they all come together to make the perfect grungy, woodsy fountain pen. Not only is it pleasing to my eyes, but it also fits perfectly in my hand. My one complaint about this fountain pen is the Bach nib. It was over polished, which means it suffered from baby's bottom. I had a few hard starts in my initial thoughts video, and that issue persisted until I took some micro mesh to it. I was very successful until I wasn't. I ended up over polishing the nib again. I used 4,000, 8,000, and 12,000 grit micro mesh, and all of that attention was a bit too much for the nib. I just left it as is for the rest of September because my newbie fix was still an improvement. I did return to it later with 2,400 grit to remove the baby's bottom again, 8,000 grit to tone down the feedback, and then 12,000 grit to finish it off. I might continue to play with this nib over time because I want it to write wetter, and I know that I can replace this nib for about $15 if I end up destroying it. For those of you who would like to offer any nib grinding tips, I am all ears. I am slightly conflicted about this Platinum 3776. The pen is beautiful and the medium nib writes so well, but the size and weight distribution of the pen's parts irk me. I've started gripping my pens further back in general, so this pen is slightly too short for me to use unposted. Unfortunately, this pen feels back-weighted when I do post it. The silhouette cap is exactly the same weight as my Chenonceau cap, but the posted Chenonceau feels more balanced in my hand. Even with the imbalance giving me the occasional hand cramp, I still prefer the look, feel, and nib of the Nagasawa silhouette. Oh yeah, the ink, Sailor Shikiori Minori, is beautiful as always, and I immensely enjoyed watching the wet green ink dry down to a soft brown. Speaking of the ink, there was a mishap with the converter. It recently became dislodged from the section and made a mess inside the pen body. Unfortunately, this converter issue is not unique to my silhouette. I experienced this same issue when I bought the Chenonceau White. I suspect that I'll need to refill a cartridge whenever I want to use the silhouette, just like I've always done with the Chenonceau. I'm curious, if you own a Platinum 3776, please tell me, do you have a converter that fits snugly and securely in your pen, or are you limited to cartridges like I am? This is an old Omas Ogiva in Saft Green with a medium nib. I really love how this pen can look completely black depending on how you cap the pen. This is my absolute favorite pen of all time, and it is inked up with one of my favorite inks. It was the best experience I've ever had with a fountain pen. What would make this even better? A cursive italic nib, but I wouldn't dare touch this nib because it's so nice already. If I could have gotten a custom grind from the old Omas company, that would have made this pen perfect for me. Alas, every pen has to have a flaw. But even with this flaw, that's not really a flaw, it's still leagues ahead of every other pen in this September lineup. The crazy thing is that I would forget what it felt like to write with this pen and consider others as my favorite writing instrument. But when I returned to the Ogiva, the experience was always sublime. I said it before and I'll say it again. Get yourself a pen that you don't want to put down. This month, I feel like I am scoring Olympic athletes. This level of ranking seems unnecessary in the sense that even the worst of the bunch is still more advanced than the general population. Now, I'm not saying that these 13 pens are better than every other pen in my collection, but I am saying that each of these pairings is so good that even the pen in 13th place still provides a wonderful writing experience. I could have picked up any pen in this set and been totally happy to write with it. Because of my experiences this month, I have come to desire that level of satisfaction in my future journaling sessions. I believe that my standards have been raised, and I am now eager to see how my fountain pen collection will morph to suit my current preferences. It is no surprise that first place goes to the Omas Ogiva Saft Green with Sailor Manyo Shirakashi. It was all around my favorite pen and ink pairing. In second place is the Pelikan M800 Brown Black with Pelikan 4001 Brilliant Brown. I absolutely love the weight of this pen and the grind on the nib. Third place goes to the Franklin-Christoph Model 2 in Ice and Primary Manipulation 1 with a broad sig nib. It's inked up with Manuscript Praline frosting. I am partial to these italic style grinds. So of course, the next would be the Esterbrook Estie Oversized with the Journaler nib. It's inked up with Diamine Spiced Apple, which I enjoyed more than I thought I would. The Esterbrook Model J with the Techo nib Inked Up with Diamine Flame is in 5th place. It provided a really nice writing experience, and I loved the texture of that nib on every single paper that I used. In 6th place is the Montegrappa Elmo Marshmallow with an extra fine nib, inked up with Inkebara 610 Deer Brown. This pen was in 6th place just because of the fact that the pen is not completely airtight. In 7th place is the SCHON Design full-sized fountain pen with Anderillium Tolype Moth Warm. This pen was in 7th place because it just felt a little bit too thick for my smaller Hobonichi style handwriting. The SCRIBO Feel Graniglia is in 8th place because of the ink issues that I encountered, as well as the blue that I wasn't so fond of using. In 9th place is the Platinum 3776 Nagasawa Silhouette with a medium nib, inked up with Sailor Shikiori Minori. It performed well, it was just a little off balance. 10th place is the Fountain Telling 3 Olive Martini fountain pen with Sailor Manyo Fuji. 11th place goes to the TWSBI Eco Smoke Rose Gold, inked up with Colorverse Iris Nebula. 12th place is the TWSBI Eco in white with Dominant Industry Matin. And 13th place goes to Brute Force Design Spalted Maple with Pelikan 4001 Dark Green. And that was solely because of the nib. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments or recommendations based on everything that I've shared in this video, please leave that information in the comments below. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye-bye.